Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Saying a mantra, so we'll all repeat it, and it's a mantra that we say to bring the grace of the Supreme into this assembly before we speak. So it's an easy mantra. I'll just say it and everyone will repeat it. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 3rd canto out of 12, and we're now on chapter number 3, which is called The Glories of Devotional Service. And we're taking up where we left off yesterday at text number 12. So the next part's a little complicated because we're going to be reciting the Sanskrit, but whether you recite or just hear it, it's the same. So the vibration's pure. Maitreya Uvacha Iti Swamatur Niravadyamipshitam Nishamya Pungsam Apavargavardhanam Dhiyabhinantyatmavatam satangatir Vabhasha ishat smita shobhitanana. Word for word meanings of the verse. Maitreya Uvacha. Maitreya said, Iti, thus, Swamatu, of his mother, Niravadyam, uncontaminated, Ipsitam, desire, Nishamya, after hearing, Pungsam, of people, Apavarga, cessation of bodily existence, Vardhanam, increasing, Tiya, mentally, Abhinandya, having thanked, Atmavatam, interested in self-realization, Satam, of the transcendentalists, Gati, the path, Vabhashe, he explained, Ishat, slightly, Smita, smiling, Shobhita, beautiful, Anana, his face. Translation. Maitreya said, after hearing of his mother's uncontaminated desire for transcendental realization, the Lord thanked her within himself for her questions, and thus, his face smiling, he explained the path of the transcendentalists who are interested in self-realization. Please repeat. Maitreya said, after hearing of his mother's uncontaminated desire for transcendental realization, the Lord thanked her within himself for her questions, and thus, his face smiling, he explained the path of the transcendentalists who are interested in self-realization. Purport. Devahuti has surrendered her confession of material entanglement and her desire to gain release. Her questions to Lord Kapila are very interesting for persons who are actually trying to get liberation from material entanglement and attain the perfectional stage of human life. Unless one is interested in understanding his spiritual life or his constitutional position, and unless he also feels inconvenience in material existence, his human form of life is spoiled. One who does not care for these transcendental necessities of life and simply engages like an animal in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating has spoiled his life. Lord Kapila was very much satisfied by his mother's questions because the answers stimulate one's desire for liberation from the conditional life of material existence. Such questions are called apavargavardhanam. Those who have actual spiritual interest are called sat, or devotees. Satam prasangat. Sat means that which actually exists, and asat means that which is not eternal. Unless one is situated on the spiritual platform, he is not sat, he is asat. The asat stands on the platform which will not exist, but anyone who stands on the spiritual platform will exist eternally. As spirit soul, everyone exists eternally, but the asat has accepted the material world as his shelter, and therefore he is full of anxiety. Asat grahan, the incompatible situation of the spirit soul who has the false idea of enjoying matter, is the cause of the soul's being asat. Actually, the spirit soul is not asat. As soon as one is conscious of this fact and takes to Krishna consciousness, he becomes sat. Satam gati, the path of the eternal. The path of the eternal is very interesting to persons who are after liberation. And his lordship Kapila began to speak about that path. This is Krishna in one of his forms named Kapila. He has many different forms. And here he's speaking to his mother, Devahuti. And she's expressed already that she's tired of material existence, frustrated with the fact that her senses are always pursuing sense objects, and there's not only very little taste in pursuing sense objects or contacting them, but also there's great frustration. And now she's putting her questions before Kapila Dev, who's perfectly capable of answering everything. So here we're hearing about the reaction that Kapila Dev has to her questions, her sincere questions about self-realization that she's asking. And that is, he's thanking her from within himself for the good questions. And is smiling and is just preparing, as we know from the subsequent verses, to answer her completely. So in the verse we hear about apavarga actually. So the questions that she's asking Kapila Dev bring one to this, what is called apavarga. So this is a concept that Prabhupada talks about when he comments on this verse. First of all, there's pavarga, which indicates the various aspects of material existence. So the word pavarga contains pa, ba, pa, and ma. So pa means that one who comes into this world is obligated to work very hard to maintain oneself. And the next word, pa, indicates how hard one has to work to stay alive in this world. And that word refers to fenil, which means foam comes from the mouth. Just like an animal who works in a farmyard and pulls a cart, sometimes you see that they're working very hard and foam is coming from their mouth. So pa means working hard. Pa means working so hard that foam comes from the mouth. Then bhavisya means that whatever work one does in the material world, ultimately we lose everything, so it's considered to be futile. And then bha means fear. Even as I'm accumulating, even as I'm working here in this world, I'm afraid because at any moment, whatever I have can be taken away, ultimately by death, which erases this chapter in our sojourn in the material world, and we have to start all over again. And then finally, ma. which refers to mrityu or death. So it's a trick in Sanskrit when you put an akar, an A, before a word. Usually it reverses the meaning. So pavarga, or the path of struggle in the material world, becomes apavarga, which means that you've reversed it. Now you're no longer obligated to stay in the material world and work hard, but you've begun your ascent to the spiritual world, which is called our eternal home. And how is that done? As mentioned in this verse, by the process of spiritual realization, which begins from asking a question. This is called apavarga vardhanam, the path of increasing the cessation of bodily existence. So we see here it's a question, and the questions are very important that we ask. So this comes up many times. Oh, by the way, Shamipras, this is for you. I need a couple of references. This comes up in the Bhagavatam, the importance of asking questions. So we find in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that the scene is that there's a group of sages. They've gathered in a forest for the purpose of finding out the purpose of life. And they meet a great teacher named Sutta Goswami. So you can imagine in a very ideal setting in the forest, and there's all these sages, and they have great desire to hear about self-realization, as all of you do, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here early in the morning. And then they ask Sutta Goswami many questions. Those questions come up in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam. There are 7 questions which are vital and which actually are answered throughout the 12 cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam. For instance, they ask, Kova Bhagavatastasya Punya Shloketi Karmana, that who is there who wants to get free from the influence of the material world, especially in the modern age of Kali, the present age that we're living in, who won't listen to this? That's answered in the 10th canto, when Shukadev Goswami says, people who are literally killing themselves or very dedicated to killing animals, they'll have an aversion to self-realization. And there are other questions, like Bhurini Bhuri Karmani Shotavyani Vibhagasha, in which the sages say, there's so many scriptures in the world, and how can we find the essence of them? What is the purpose of all of them? It can be confusing, so they're asking Sutta Goswami, please distill it, find out what the ultimate purpose of all these various scriptures are, so that we can actually practice spiritual life and not simply be overwhelmed with information. And like this, the sages ask very important, pointed questions to the right person. And it's described in that chapter also that when you ask questions, you should ask the right person. The sages note, actually, that Sutta Goswami is the right person because they say that he, Sutta Goswami, has received the knowledge from his spiritual masters. And the reason that they gave it to him because he was very submissive and he listened very carefully to his teachers and followed what they said, and therefore he has become qualified to speak. So one shouldn't ask questions to somebody who's not fully experienced, who doesn't know the answers, having not listened properly to a bona fide teacher. So that sets the scene for the first chapter of the Bhagavatam. So in the second chapter, Sutta Goswami answers. And one of the first things he says is, Munaya saraprishtoham bhavad birlokamangalam yakrita krishna samprashno yina ma suprasidati. So this has a very simple but important meaning. He's congratulating all the sages, and he's saying, you did very well. You asked very good questions. Munaya, to all you munis, Munaya sadhu prishtoham bhavad bir lokamangalam And the reason he's appreciating the questions of the sages, he says, Lokamangalam, it's good for everybody in the world, these questions. Everyone will benefit from hearing the questions and the answers to these questions. Yakrita Krishna Samprashno, because Samprashna, Krishna Samprashno, they're questions about Krishna, about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These are good questions. Yenatma suprasidati. So he says, only these kinds of questions and answers, of course, can satisfy the self. Now the Bhagavatam goes on in the second canto to mention Shrotavyadini Rajendra Nrinam Santi Sahasrasa Apashyatam Atmatattvam Griheshu Grihamedinam. Says Shukadeva Goswami notes that in human society, people have many different topics for hearing. And there are many different kinds of questions and answers. Now Prabhupada goes at great length in the verse before that to describe how everyone is engaged in society, whether it's animal society or human society, in asking questions and giving the answers. So he mentions that birds, when they wake up in the morning, they start asking questions. And then other birds are giving the answers. I mean, it's a little, their syntax and the sophistication of their language is not like humans, but definitely they have vocabulary. They're speaking about, does anyone want to be my mate? You know, the mockingbird will sit up on the roof and sing until someone comes along and go, okay, how about it? You know, that's the main question in nature. And then where's food? And crows, there's been a lot of study of crows. They're very communicative. They tell each other things like, you know, there's some garbage over here, and have at it. Or one of our fellow crows just got killed, and then they become morose, and they all gather around, and they perform a kind of, they mourn over the death of the crow. So there it is in bird society, animal society, there's questions and answers, and human society as well. Noted in this purport today is Prabhupada's statement that these questions normally are all about the base activities of the animals. That is eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And of course, from the Hitopadesh we learn that Hara Nidra Bhayamaitanam Cha, that these are common to animals and humans. Samanyame tat. I forget the rest of the verse. But in any case, it's an algebraic equation. It says, so humans and animals eat, sleep, mate, and defend. Humans also eat, sleep, mate, and defend, but there's an extra thing that humans can do, and is ask questions about, well, where did I come from? And what's the purpose to my life? So then it says, if humans don't ask that question, then they're the same as animals. There's no difference at all. Actually, animals are people too, if you've ever noticed. I walked in the room in my office the other day, and there was a little spider on the desk. And I guess I came in kind of fast, and he looked at me and he goes, uh-oh, I got to get out of here. And he started taking off. And I was thinking, how'd you know? You know, like, and he looked at me, and you know, I could tell he was a person. You know, he had a cognition that you know, here's a big giant, and I should probably get out of here. And all living entities have that. The only thing that animals don't have, that spiders don't have, is an interest in asking the questions of where do I come from, what's the source, what's my source, my original divine source, and so forth. So if anybody asks this question in the world, it's out of the ordinary. And especially if they ask good questions, then you'll find throughout the Bhagavatam that they'll be congratulated. It's like, very good, you asked something that's very important. There's a lot to be said about good questions, or questions in general. Yeah, just in secular society, people talk about the importance of questions. Here's a few quotes, if I may. May I?
Yes.
Sometimes questions are more important than the answers. It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question. Judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers. Voltaire said that. Asking the right questions takes as much skill as giving the right answers. To be able to ask a question clearly is 2/3 of the way to getting it answered. If you do not ask the right questions, you do not get the right answers. A question asked in the right way often points to its own answer. Successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers. For true success, ask yourself these 4 questions. Why? Why not? Why not me? Why not now? Who questions much shall learn much and retain much. It is better to know some of the questions than all of the answers. I found I wasn't asking good enough questions because I assumed I knew something. Do you like that one? The uncreative mind can spot wrong answers, but it takes a very creative mind to spot wrong questions. We thought we had the answers. It was the questions we had wrong. That was Bono. The uncreative mind can spot wrong answers, but it takes a very creative mind to spot wrong questions. There are no, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. There are no right answers to wrong questions. The one who asks questions doesn't lose his way. That's an African proverb. Question everything, learn something, answer nothing. Engineer's motto. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Is to not stop questioning. Albert Einstein. So there's a lot about questions, actually. In fact, there's a whole section I saw about bad questions. There are 5 categories of bad questions that one might ask. And those are, you'll recognize some of these. Leading questions are bad. For instance, if someone says, how short was Napoleon? That's a bad question, because it leads to the answer. These are especially for questionnaires. You should say, what was Napoleon's stature? An open question, not a leading question. Then there's the loaded question, which is also in the category of bad questions. Where do you enjoy drinking beer? Which means if you answer the question, you're doomed, because then you're just admitting you just drank beer. Or the famous one from the courtroom, when did you stop beating your wife? So if you answer that, you're implicated. And then there are other kinds, like double-barreled questions, questions that use absolutes, unclear questions, and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into questioning, especially if you're in a court of law, or if you're trying to get accurate information for marketing or for any other useful purpose. Questions are very, very important. And the kinds of questions you ask then indicate your level of advancement in spiritual life as well. I've found that when we have really good hearing and chanting sessions, that we come out with more questions than we do answers. For instance, when we have at Govardhan, when we hear extensively every day for several hours, then I always notice that I have good questions, because we'll find sections of the Bhagavatam where we want to know more. And the questions are nuanced and they relate to the ongoing material that we're studying. And you might notice sometimes if someone gives a class and then they ask, are there any questions? And everyone just sits there. Nobody has any questions. Because questions are hard. You really have to be prepared to ask questions. It means that you have to be hearing and chanting a lot and thinking about the topic of spiritual realization deeply, sincerely, and you really want to know the answer, to have a burning question ready for someone who says, you have any questions? And like, what do I do now? And also, you'll notice if a competent speaker is speaking, I've noticed this, if someone does a command performance in speaking, then says, are there any questions? There's usually more questions, because people feel that, oh, I could ask anything and this person could answer it. Whereas if somebody is struggling along giving a presentation and asks, are there any questions? Like, I think I'll hold it until I meet somebody else, because I'm not sure what kind of answer you're going to give. Just a few more points about questions and how important they are. And I've taught this in my seminar about Communications 101. I like my saying is questions are the answer to good communication. And in that way, questions are like hooks. If you make a little question mark with your finger like that, try it. What does it resemble? I already said, yeah, a hook. So it looks like a hook, and whoever's asking the questions is leading the conversation. Oftentimes people think, I'll just tell. But that doesn't lead the conversation. But if you ask questions, then you're hooking onto somebody, and you can pull them in the direction you want to go by asking proper questions. You'll notice this if you ever have to go to what do they call it when they question you outside of court? Deposition. They ask you hundreds of questions, thousands sometimes. They'll just keep asking, what about this? What about that? What about this? And so questions lead the conversation in a certain direction. If you make a question mark, it also could become a tennis racket. So if somebody asks you a question that you don't like or you don't answer or don't want to answer, you can always hit it back to them by asking another question. In other words, answer a question with a question. Someone asks you the question, and then you say, how do you mean that? Now they have to redefine it and send it back to you. So questions are very, very powerful. In fact, the question mark is the most powerful punctuation mark in any language because of the aforementioned reasons that I just gave. Do you accept that, Vinod Kovita? Okay. Leading the witness. So I want to look at some of the famous places in the Shastra where some very interesting questions were asked by very qualified people, and then they were answered by the most qualified of people, just to have a sampling of what we're talking about here, about questions and answers. Does that sound okay to all of you?
Yes.
Okay. So the first place we're going to look is at the Chaitanya Charitamrita. No, actually, we're looking at the Bhagavad Gita. This is Bhagavad Gita 254. And who remembers the question that Arjuna asks at 254, or the questions?
How do they talk?
How do they walk? Then what else?
How do they sit?
How do they sit? And who's they?
The self-realized soul.
Yeah, self-realized soul. So Arjuna is asking, after he hears about the importance of self-realization in the Bhagavad Gita, he's asking Krishna, what are the symptoms of somebody who's self-realized? So he says, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? And what is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk? So then Krishna goes about answering these questions one by one. And we're treated to a description of the symptoms of the person whose mind is merged in transcendence. And Krishna starts off by giving this definition of a person who's come into self-realization. So he says, Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatam atman yevatmana tushta stita pragnas tadochate. So in answering his question, how does a person who's self-realized act? Stita pragnas tadochate. Tadochate means that it is said that this is the symptom of a person. And then what is the first symptom he lists? Prajahati yada kaman. that person is able to give up material desires. And where do they come from? Sarvan Partha Manogatan. Manogatan means the mind is a factory, and it's got a little conveyor belt coming out of it, and there's little desires and ideas that rolling off the conveyor belt, one after another, after another, after another, and it just keeps going. And the person who has recognized that these actually have nothing to do with my self-interest, or they're not even mine, they're just being produced by the mind, which goes and goes and goes. Manogatan means the mind goes. The person, Prajahati, he's given that up. He's given up a connection with these manufactured thoughts and desires and so forth. And the second part is Atmanyevatmana Tushta. Tushta means Tushta Krishna, our friend here at Sam. But it also means satisfaction. So it means that Atmanyevatmana Tushta means the person is able to find satisfaction within and doesn't need to pursue the desires that lead to the external world. So that person's finding satisfaction within him or herself. Astita pragnastadochide. That's what's called a self-realized person, he says. And he goes on from there to describe the symptoms. Isn't that useful to know? So we thank Arjuna for asking that question. And how does a person speak? He wants to know too. Prabhashe. What is his language? The language, Prabhupada points out, is a very important part of discovering a person's consciousness. He had nothing to say, and then he said it. Or a fool is discovered only when he speaks. There's a story about the Muslim mullah who had a long white beard, and he would go from town to town giving beautiful talks on the Quran, and people in the village would gather around and listen. And then there was a woman in the audience. Every day when the speaker would come, the mullah would begin to speak, and the woman would weep, and tears would glide down her face. And after speaking for a week, everyone gathered and they were speaking with the mullah. He was interacting with everyone, and he met this young woman, and he said, well, thank you for coming to all my class. He said, it was such a great pleasure to hear you speak. And he said, now I noticed that you had such a deep reaction to what I was saying, and I was very touched by that, and I'd just like to know, what was it that I was saying that was so deeply meaningful to you? And she said, well, it's not exactly like that. Actually, what it is that in our family, we had a billy goat, and our billy goat had a long beard, just like yours. And it died recently, and when you're speaking, your beard would wag back and forth. And that's how our billy goat used to, when it would cry and was hungry, its beard would also wag back and forth. And I thought of our billy goat. That's why I was crying. So you don't know until somebody actually speaks up what's in their consciousness, because sound, speech carries consciousness. So this is another symptom that Krishna mentions when Arjuna asks the important question, what are the symptoms of a self-realized person? The self-realized person speaks about Krishna, speaks about the absolute truth. And not only that, whenever such a person gives a definitive statement, he or she then backs it up by saying, here's how I can prove this through Scripture, and doesn't just make things up. And there are many other symptoms of a person who's self-realized, and that one can judge by how he or she speaks. So just realize that the Bhagavad Gita is questions and answers, and they're vital. If we had not had those questions and answers, then how would we be guided in spiritual life? The next one is from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is the 16.8. 245. This is, I'm looking at 1671. Yeah, so the residents of Kulina Gram asked Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was visiting, and they came to him and asked him a question. They said, how can we engage in devotional service? And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you should serve devotees and you should chant Hare Krishna. And then they asked the next question. They said, who's a devotee? It's a good thing to know. Krishna said, Lord Chaitanya said, serve the devotees. So they said, well, how do we know who's a devotee or not? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu answered, and he said, anyone who says Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna.
that's a devotee. He said, even if I hear one time someone says Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna.
then that person I consider to be the best out of all the people. And that person's a devotee, so you should appreciate that person. And serve that person who says Hare Krishna. Then, the next year, they asked him again, how can we be of service? And Mahaprabhu said, serve the devotees, chant Hare Krishna. And they asked again, tell us again who's a devotee. And this time he said, anyone who's chanting Hare Krishna constantly, there's no breakage in their chanting. He said, that person you should serve. And then the next year they asked again, and he said that a person upon whom seeing everybody else starts chanting Hare Krishna. In other words, they see him and they go, Hare Krishna, because the person's countenance is so surcharged spiritually that it inspires other people to chant. He said, that person is a devotee. Of course, they're all devotees, but he named 3 different levels of Vaishnavas. And this nuance came out because the residents of Kulinagram asked this important question year after year, how can we serve? And then they followed up, who is a devotee? Please tell us who's a devotee. One simple question it can help to the right person, can give us our mission in life. For instance, our Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of ISKCON, asked his spiritual master, how can I serve you? He noted in his letter to his guru that you have so many disciples and they have so much intimate service, but I live outside, I don't live in the ashram. How can I be of service? And his guru answered him that you try to push on Krishna consciousness in the Western world, and if you ever get money, print books. And Prabhupada took the answer that he got from his guru and he held on to it as his main focus in life. Vyavasayatmaka buddhi. In other words, his intelligence was fixed on the answer. And that's what Srila Prabhupada attributed to his success over the years. I asked the question, my guru answered me, I got that, and I took it as my life and soul. And that's why I had a modicum of success, he would say. It's because of that. And then we find Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asking questions to Ramananda Roy. And that is in the 8th chapter of the Madhya Lila. And I'm going to read you some of the questions he asks, so you have a sample of what are excellent questions and even more excellent answers. Ready?
Yes.
I'm not convinced at all.
Yes.
Okay. On one occasion, Lord Chaitanya inquired, of all types of education, which is the most important? What do you think? Communications, economics, electrical engineering? What do you think he'll say? Ramananda Roy replied, no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then asked Ramananda Roy, out of all glorious activities, which is the most glorious? Ramananda Roy replied, that person who is reputed to be a devotee of Lord Krishna enjoys the utmost fame and glory. You know the next question?
Yeah.
What is it?
What's the biggest suffering?
Said, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of many capitalists, who possesses great riches? Who possess great riches, who is the topmost of all the capitalists? What would you say? The owner of Amazon? Facebook? No. Ramananda Roy replied, he who is richest in love for Radha Krishna is the greatest capitalist. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, of all kinds of distress, what is the most painful? Ramana Roy replied, apart from separation from the devotee of Krishna, I know of no unbearable unhappiness. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then inquired, out of all liberated persons, who should be accepted as the greatest? Ramananda Roy replied, he who has love for Krishna has attained the topmost liberation. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu next asked Ramananda Roy, among many songs, which song is to be considered the actual religion of the living entity? What do you think his answer will be?
Bohemian Rhapsody.
No, it's not Bohemian Rhapsody. Ramananda Roy replied, that song describing the loving affairs of Sri Radha and Krishna is superior to all other songs. Of course, I don't know if Bohemian Rhapsody includes that because I've not analyzed the song carefully. Then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of all auspicious and beneficial activities, which is best for the living entity? Ramananda Roy replied, the only auspicious activity is association with the devotees of Krishna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, what should all living entities constantly remember? Ramananda Roy replied, the chief objects of remembrance are always the Lord's holy name, qualities, and pastimes. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu inquired, out of many types of meditation, which is required for all living entities? Vipassana? No? Sri Ramananda Roy replied, the chief duty of every living entity is to meditate upon the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, where should the living entity live, abandoning all other places? Fort Collins? Ramananda Roy replied, he should live in the holy place known as Vrindavan or Vrajabhumi, where the Lord performs his rasa dance. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, out of all topics people listen to, which is best for all living entities? Ramananda Roy replied, hearing about the loving affairs between Radha and Krishna is most pleasing to the ear. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked, among all worshipable objects, which is the chief? Ramananda Roy replied, the chief worshipable object is the holy name of Radha and Krishna, the Hare Krishna mantra. And what is the destination of those who desire liberation and those who desire sense gratification? Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked. Ramananda Roy replied, those who attempt to merge into the existence of the Supreme Lord will have to accept bodies like those of trees, and those who are overly inclined towards sense gratification will attain the bodies of demigods. So we have a sampling here of the most pointed and spiritually astute questions, and same with the answers. And one can train one's intelligence by hearing these questions and answers. And one of the primary, or the primary process of devotional service is hearing the questions and answers of great souls, asking pertinent questions and hearing the answers, or ourselves then asking questions to qualified personalities and taking the answers. And by that we become more and more fixed in the process of devotional service. Therefore, Kaviraj Goswami says, Siddhanta bholaya chitana kara alash iha hoite Krishna lagi sudrid manash. That one shouldn't be lazy about inquiring about the Supreme Absolute Truth or discussing it. Because by that discussion, one develops sudrid manash, one's mind becomes fixed. One should ask questions, express doubts, and have those doubts removed so that one can be fixed on the path of self-realization. Now we just have a little time because I used up most of it. And we can take some reflections or questions. Yes? The question? Okay.
Is it okay to not ask a question?
That was a question, so I don't know.
This reminded me about the question in a lot of the quotes that you read. It reminds me of growing and expanding. That the nature of spirit is to expand. And that when we are asking a question, it means we're wanting to grow. And when we're in a question, it's like we're on the threshold of expanding or growing.
Well put, yeah, absolutely. And it's a state of consciousness where we're always on the ready to ask a good question. Tadvidi pranipatina priprashnena seveya Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, this is how you advance in spiritual life. Find a qualified person and very humbly and in a mood of service, go ask questions. And that person will divulge the truth. 1, 2, 3.
I drew a question mark and I realized it also resembles an ear.
Oh.
So the kind of quite intimate relationship between questions and hearing.
Bravo. Well done, sir.
Are there questions that we should avoid asking the spiritual master or some of the sadhus?
Yes. And Prabhupada mentions it in the Bhagavad Gita. One should avoid absurd inquiries. Anything that's not really related to the topic or not meant to actually help us to advance in devotional service. I'll give you an example. I have a godbrother, Sri Charnam. He's Japanese, he joined in Japan and around 1975 or something. Prabhupada was visiting Japan and he was brand new and he came and he got to ask Prabhupada some questions. Actually only one question, I believe. But he asked Prabhupada, have you ever met Indra? And Prabhupada answered, what difference does it make if I met Indra or not? He said, you should ask questions that are related to your advancement in devotional service. So it's kind of an absurd question. You could tell by the context and the mood of the question too, that it was just like asking a question for the sake of asking something and it wasn't really related to a question that had come up because of his search for the absolute truth or in the course of studying it or some inner pressing question. It was just sort of a curiosity and for the sake of asking something, he asked that. Absurd inquiries and so forth. And also, Prabhupada said sometimes people will come to a saintly person and ask for Ashribad, like give some benediction. Can you cure my arthritis? Don't ask that from a spiritually advanced person because it's irrelevant to our spiritual advancement. Okay, Stephanie was next.
Thank you for the class. I just have a realization and a question.
Wow, good combination.
So I was realizing from the question mark and the tennis and two different things happened when I was at work at IBM. I could tell when people would work out on a team. And so when I'd be training them or onboarding them, if I was teaching them something and we get to the end of a mark and I'd be like, okay, do you have any questions? And some of them, or just trained or something, I think it's sometimes in college, trained to do this, just be like, no, I got it, I'm good. And I could tell if that happened over and over again, that actually they wouldn't be a good teammate. It would end up later on, they'd either think they got it or they didn't want to ask a question and look silly. So it would end up that they wouldn't be proactive and something would fall through and some program wouldn't work. And so you could see that if they didn't ask questions. And then the other part of that, when I was their manager and they would come to me and ask questions, it was best to ask them a question about what they've done so far or have they gone this route instead of giving them the answer, because when they came up with their own answers, they felt more empowered. So that was really cool to see, to not just give someone the answer or else they don't feel as empowered to work through it and then find out new stuff.
These are very practical points. Very helpful. Thank you.
And then my question is, so when we're in school, I remember from elementary school or middle school, all the teachers being there's no such thing as a silly question kind of thing, and I want to understand the balance of that almost there is such a thing we're talking about in this class. There is such a thing as not the greatest question because we're not talking about the absolute truth, and at the same time people being open to asking questions.
It really depends on the mood of the questioner. For instance, if we're talking about spiritual circles, and let's say a very qualified person is speaking, and then you ask a question that detracts from the conversation in the assembly, that goes off topic, or is self-serving. Sometimes you can feel that when somebody asking a self-serving question, and it disturbs the environment. Therefore, we find even at the assemblage of sages at Naimisharanya, it was important who was addressing Sutta Goswami also. The senior person was supposed to be their qualified person who was welcoming, appreciating. There was some protocol because the mood is important. You create an environment when you have hearing and chanting together. And if upstarts drag it off course by, and asking questions that don't fit the mood and aren't really to the point. They're not qualified to ask the question. If someone's very sincere, seeker, and is a neophyte, just starting, but asks the question in the right mood, and it's simple, then it will be appreciated by everybody. Oh, this person's actually wants to know the question. So it's the quality of the questions that elicit the quality of answers also. And that has to do with the consciousness of the person asking the question. But I always like to say I give $100 for silly questions, but I have to check and see if I have that amount of cash. Okay, Nirakula, you have one? No, okay. Who was that? Was that you? Had your hand up? Okay. 1, 2. Hare Krishna.
Is there a practical way to improve quality of your questions?
Yeah, hear and chant more deeply. For instance, really pay attention to the topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Take great interest in them. And as you're doing so, good questions will arise. This is what I mentioned earlier would answer this question. And that is that if you're very attentive to your practice of self-realization and desirous of moving forward, then naturally good questions will come up out of necessity. Those questions that come out of a spiritual necessity or hunger to know how to advance are the best. So that's one way. And the other way is to observe the kinds of questions that advanced devotees ask and model after that. But really, it's most important that we have a need to know and a hunger to know, because that comes out in our consciousness and in our questioning.
I was appreciating the point that you made about how when there's a good hearing and chanting session, or basically when you're progressing, you get more questions. Because oftentimes we see one of the things that can prevent people from taking up is they think that all my questions aren't answered, so therefore I can't take up devotional service. So it's actually, it seems counterintuitive, but the reality is that the more that we take up the practice, the more that we progress, we have more questions.
Yeah. And I always find that a deep study of the Shastra, association with advanced devotees, leads me to other very advanced devotees. Because if I have good questions, then they're like, they actually lead me to the advanced devotees, because I have them. And they're like, this is a good question, and I really want to know. And then I'm looking around, who can answer this? Where's the fit? Where does this question, with whom does this question fit? Who can actually answer it? And in doing that, I'll find where's the advanced devotee who can answer this question. And that's a happy day when that happens, to find somebody who actually answer your question in a satisfactory way, because then you start a new relationship. Like Madhava Maharaj always says, no questions, no relationship. You don't know Madhava Maharaj, otherwise you'd be laughing. But he'd always say, you don't have any questions, then no questions, no relationship. If you don't have questions, where's the relationship?
You're not human if
Not human if you don't have questions. Did he say that too? Okay. Well, that sounds like Madhava Maharaj. So, but it's true that our relationships grow because of questions, or they even start because of questions. And they're so vital. So again, we notice, just in closing, that Krishna himself appreciates good questions. He's the reservoir of all answers. And when somebody comes to him with an excellent question, then as in this verse, he's smiling. And inside he's thinking, this person is very good, they're advanced. So we can judge how we're advancing. I'm promoting this theory by the kinds of questions we're coming up with. The frequency of questions we're coming up with will also indicate how deeply we're studying and how eager we are to know how to advance in devotional service. And to the degree that we perfect our question asking process, to that degree we'll also advance in devotional service. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. And I thank everyone for taking your valuable time to assemble here today, and to everybody who joined us online from various places around the world. All of us here at new-badrikasram say, Hare Krishna, Gaur Premanande, Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo, Nitai Gaura Haribo, Bo, Haribo, Nitai Gaura Haribo. Vanjakalpatarubhascha kripasnivevcha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha nantakoti vaishnavi ki jai.
Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.